Well, welcome, Dr. Elissa Farrow, to the Change It podcast. It's fantastic to have you here today.
Thank you. Thanks for inviting me along.
Well, I am very excited for our conversation today around the importance of change leadership as we look to the future and cast our crystal ball ahead of time. But before we get into that, keen for the listeners to get insight into who you are and what you do. Do you have hidden talent, party trick, passion, something that you could share that might surprise our listeners?
What a great first question. I think one of the things that surprises some people is the fact that a few years ago I did my bronze medallion with the Surf Life Saving Club on beautiful Minjerribah or North Stradbroke Island. So I'm actually a patrolling member of the Point Lookout Surf Life Saving Club. So, every few weeks on a weekend during the sort of summer months, I sort of get out there in my red and yellow and give to the community. And I've been a volunteer in some form through my whole life, starting from probably when I was about 15 years old. So it's a big part of who I am. And so it's not really a party trick, but it's something about my heart, I guess, and giving back to the community is like a big part of who I am.
That's amazing. And do you do that, or you keep that up every month?
Yeah. The Surf Life Saving Queensland and across Australia, like in Queensland, we only stop for winter here, even though it's still, tropical Queensland, where I'm in beautiful Meanjin or Brisbane. It's great weather all the time. So yeah, I've got superpowers. So I know how to, apply first aid. I know how to apply a defibrillator, which is pretty handy skill. I know how to hang on with some trepidation to a inflatable rescue boat. So these are all sort of good things that keep me fit, but also keep me giving back to the community.
And they're hidden talents, I guess, with all of your events and being in busy spaces like you are, it's good to have those skills. It's quite reassuring to know that you're fully trained.
Yeah. Well, I actually really appreciate the difference between my corporate work versus getting my body close to the earth and being really grounded and just standing on the beach for 4 hours providing community safety on a weekend actually makes me feel really grounded and with luck, there's no major incidences, but if there is, well, we're ready for action.
And switching from that grounded earthwork to your corporate world, what is it that you are known for now, and how did you get into the career that you kind of find yourself in?
Yeah, well, I finished a doctorate in 2022, where I looked at organizations of the future and the implications of artificial intelligence on the operating model, on leadership, on the approach. And prior to that time, I'd been working as a consultant since about 2011. And I just was really observing that people weren't really managing change all that well. Like, I'm a social scientist originally, so my first job after university was working in domestic and family violence prevention work, and that's sort of really significant sort of personal and community sort of change. And then worked in government for a while and just got curious about how to enact strategy in more effective and efficient ways. So for me, the work that I do now as Dr. Elissa Farrow is an extension of pretty much everything that I've been building up to in my career. But the difference, I guess, between the Elissa, let's say 6 years ago versus the Elissa today is a very firm focus on futures and strategic foresight as part of the techniques and tools that I use to help organizations adapt to the future.
That's amazing. And we're going to dive into some of that today. There's always, I think, this focus on workforce of the future, and I find it fascinating that, with tools like ChatGPT and some of the things we're seeing now, like Bitcoin's doing exceedingly well over the last couple of weeks, and I feel like we kind of are there. There isn't this workforce of the future. I don't know what your view is on that, but I feel like potentially we need to stop talking about it like it's some far off place, and the reality is that we're in the mix, or in the midst of it now.
Yeah, we're in the midst of creating the future. And at the moment, from my perspective, I see sometimes the developments that are coming through industry are definitely in advance of where concepts of regulation are up to. So it's a little bit of a sort of unchecked and unprecedented time. And for me at this moment, it's a real important opportunity for us all to make sure we're making the right decisions and not just being caught up in the glamour of the cool tech. Because it can bring efficiencies, economic efficiencies, but if we don't sort of consider the impact, we might make some decisions that we can't roll back from easily.
Someone spoke to me about the efficiency piece the other day, and it was like, if you compare efficiencies to, say, like the ecosystem of a doorman, and you think if we're only comparing, if we're only thinking about measuring efficiencies, and we remove the doorman and replace the doorman with an automatic door, we lose this whole chain of other things we've overlooked, like the greeting, the weather, someone handing an umbrella, the fact that actually the hotel can probably charge more per night because of the way that doorman makes the customer feel.
Yeah.
And it's a really interesting analogy for me to take it to just that doorman and think efficiency is just one small piece of such a huge measurement, or such a huge piece that we need to actually look at, and we need to not just always zoom in purely on efficiency, because otherwise we'll strip back all the enjoyment.
Yeah, that's true. And certainly there's a lot of people who are having lots of fun with AI at the moment and incorporating it into their creative processes. And so it's not all gloomy, but I think we just need to make sure that there's a degree of at least ethics, or at least an agreement, so that we don't end up having some of those more, what do they call it, dystopian futures where, the machines take us over and cause havoc. Because they're amazing pieces of technology, but they also come at a significant cost, including the cost to our climate. Just the ChatGPT alone, I think, has some of the research I've seen about just the amount of CO2 emissions that just come from running the servers that host AI tech. It's the often unspoken side of innovation, is the actual impact from an energy perspective.
Wow, I didn't even realize that. That's, yeah, exactly.
Crazy.
Under the radar. And so between your kind of looking forward to the future and the focus of your role being very much kind of looking and analysing that, how do you find balance between kind of your professional passions and self-life saving, some of your personal life?
Yeah, I think I find balance in making sure that I have some time for me in that process, because being a business owner, thought leader, my brain can be on all the time, thinking about new things and different things. So that's a bit like what I was mentioning about my surf lifesaving volunteering. For that moment, I'm not in charge, like I'm a member of the team, and there's other patrol captains and team leaders as part of that process, so it's lovely to just be part of that process. But I also love getting in the pool and swimming. I've got a good friend of mine, Trisha, who she and I go swimming quite often, and just that, looking at the black line in the bottom of the pool is really beautiful, and I know how to make a good margarita as well. So time with friends, I'm an extrovert, so like good social time with friends, bit of a dance, bit of fun is trying to get the balance, and I've got a pretty good sense of my own sort of resilience, and so sometimes I go, Liz, you just got to slow it down and just turn off for a bit. Richard, my husband's very good at saying, hey, like, just turn off the computer for a while and let's go out for dinner or do something fun.
Which is important, I think, as we look at this conversation, actually, is creating those boundaries and remembering the human facets of our life that are so important to kind of refill our cup as we
Exactly.
move into a digital world. So why the future needs change leadership? In the context of your work, you know, one of the things we've spoken heavily about, Dr. Farrow, is actually change being at the forefront of skill sets that we're looking at when you've looked at kind of what the future requires. Why do you believe that the future is calling for change leadership?
I think for me, there's a difference in terminology that might be required. And I've been feeling this for a little while and had a couple of meetings with executives recently where people say, oh, we don't like the term change management. Like, you know, it's got a different sort of dynamic to it nowadays. And maybe that could be from legacy of people having poor experiences of what change management could be like from a discipline sort of perspective. But I think for me, that sort of broader extension of change leadership requires the understanding that we can't manage people through change. We can try, but what we're really needing instead, and what I believe is that we need to be much more focused on that change in an organisation or community or planet is more of a collective effort of improvements and innovation. A theorist, Seng, who's been around for some time, talked about this concept of complexity and operating within complexity, and his approach was a bit more like a sort of garden metaphor, like where you know that at times there's infestations of pests. You also know that there's times when you want to plant your tomatoes and harvest your fruit. So this sort of more collective or collaborative type of approach to leading change is what I believe is required. And we just have to look at social media to see the people that often influence people to do something different aren't necessarily the leaders. They're those people who become leaders by being able to communicate effectively, being able to show the implications, but also in social media, try to make it positive for people through that process, a fun process or a learning process, but not one that is meant with the traditional sort of perform or get out sort of mentality, which still exists sadly in a number of different organizational settings.
The carrot and stick kind of management.
Yeah.
And so just to clarify for those that are listening that might be, you know, embarking on their career and change in their early kind of phases, when you refer to change leadership and the future calling for change leadership, you're not actually speaking about level of seniority, or are you talking about, you know, we need more senior change people?
No, I'm talking about the concept of how and what the attributes of good leaders are within the context of a changing organization, changing world. So a change, like someone with a job description on their t-shirt that says change manager, needs to be demonstrating leadership characteristics. Like they'll be maybe hopefully walking the talk. They'll be designing and co-designing effective learning strategies and change strategies and plans. But then of course there are people who are in leadership positions, or also maybe even within portfolio office functions, that need to bring in that sort of change overlay, so that we're not just making decisions about what we could deliver, but recognizing that we can only get great benefit and value from any of this project work if we have change at the very center of the whole value proposition. So change leadership for me is something that anyone can fulfill, but it is something for me that we're leading from where we are. if that makes sense. So it's a bit different from the, if I'm one of the listeners could be a contractor, change manager, or maybe a change manager embedded in an organization. You've got a very sort of standard set of tasks and functions that you then adapt and tailor for each assignment. But then the leadership overlay is that people are looking at you all the time to make sure that there's an alignment between what you're talking through versus what we're aiming for. And if there's incongruence and inconsistency in that, people start to get a bit sus that the change might not be as worth considering as maybe as what they did. We're looking for that consistency and also that openness to hear people's points of view.
Perfect, thank you. And I'd like to do a bit of a deep dive, if you'd be open to exploring some of the skills that you actually think are in that job description of what the future is calling for. So that change leadership approach, or that new title or new framing, as you say, of the change manager role, and what you think that the key pieces will be. Certainly, what you're talking to there when you talk about that kind of leading, reassuring, pitching almost to the audience to garner their support. A lot of what you're talking to is a soft skill set rather than a technical skill set. So are there key things that you think would be in that job description for the change leader versus the change manager?
Yeah, I do think so. And in my doctoral studies, I actually identified with 140 people that I was playing with in my doctoral studies, some principles for future leadership in the context of artificial intelligence in being embedded in organizations. And a couple of those elements I think are really, really important when we're considering concepts of like leadership generally, but future leaders, of course, need to have a change leadership dimension to their work. So one of those components is about making sure that leaders can actually sensitively manage the emotional responses that come through the change process. At the moment, as we can appreciate, there's a lot of uncertainty. There's a lot going on in the world. There's a lot going on in organisations, going on in Australia as well. So to be able to manage your own emotions as a change leader, but also to manage and sensitively approach others is a really important skill set, I think, that we all need. And we've talked emotional intelligence for years, but this is actually applied. So it's more than just having an appreciation, but it's actually in organisations that are going through change, where there's uncertainty, to be able to sensitively manage that emotional or approach, sensitively work through emotional responses is a really important concept. I also think leaders of the future and change leaders need to truly embrace this concept of co-design and co-delivery in the process. And again, it's been around for a while, but it's just lip service. Like people say, oh, well, we'll co-design that. But what does that actually really mean? And I've been blessed with a number of awesome clients who modeled this behavior. Like one of my favorite clients, I do work with people with a disability and their families, and they actually take a really honest and true form of participation in design, which is co-designed, co-led, co-delivered by people with disability themselves. And I'm really inspired by that notion. And I'm also inspired that it happened everywhere in a truly meaningful way. And it doesn't have to take more time, which people might get a bit worried about, but that true concept of co-design and collaboration in a meaningful way is a really important part of change leadership. So there's two sort of dimensions, but the other aspect of leading in the future is about having the right mindset. So I wrote a paper which got my 140 odd people in my doctoral studies to embody Carol Dweck's fixed and growth mindset, just for a moment, to see what their views of the future would be if they were embodying a fixed mindset, which is more like, oh, I can't learn and I'm hopeless at this, a bit more of a downer sort of view, as opposed to growth mindset, which is like, oh, I can learn anything. And if I fail, oh, well, I'll pick myself up and dust off and sort of get back on again. And the differences when people were anticipating the future from that growth mindset were immense. Like the words they used, the images they drew were polar opposite from this sort of doom and gloom, broken family, broken home, broken spirit from the fixed mindset. But growth mindset was positivity and winning and learning and seeing opportunity. And I think the mindset of a leader needs to be encouraging that reality, but also openness to having that nice culture of transparency and learning. That's what I really believe is the heart of the whole thing, future leaders.
What I think is amazing about the foundation of what you're saying there is that it's all, if you look at it, about engagement, interaction, and a kind of a level of malleability with your approach. It's kind of feeding and having that, I daren't say face to face, but a lot of the time probably would be more powerful with face to face, that interaction. And that, like you say, it's one further than emotional intelligence. It's that emotional dialogue where you can then extrapolate what you need and apply.
Yeah, because we still need to, of course, be strategic as leaders. Like leadership requires not just the sort of inspirational sort of component, but you also need to be active. The approach, you can't just sort of wave around these beautiful ideas. So it is about also just being cognizant of, we need to redefine what leadership could be, and what that means in terms of power, what that means in terms of the role, what that means in terms of honesty and building trust. They're all things that I would strongly hope that leaders of the future are not just decisive in their decision making, but they're at least willing to say, you were right and I was wrong.
And what do you think then, for someone that might be listening to this, or for someone that's being managed by a leader that is maybe in that fixed mindset, to talk Carol Dweck's, and is very, not embracing some of the future tools, potentially not managing them with that kind of emotional intelligence? Where does that person, or where do we direct those people to? Where can these softer skills be learned? What would you call on these people to look at, read into, inspire?
Yeah, if once the seed is planted, I think, like if you're in a situation where you've got a leader who may be a bit traditional in their approach, let's say, and maybe that person hasn't been exposed to newer concepts and ideas, it can be very challenging for people to navigate through those processes. I've known people recently to actually just leave their work and shift jobs because the leader, and they just felt they weren't able to get further, and the culture just seemed off for them, and that it was starting to cause them personal distress. So you need to, first of all, be open. Leaders need to be open to understanding that there are different approaches to leading. People working to leaders who are open would find it to be a more enjoyable experience, especially if those leaders are sharing what their personal journey is as well. So I've known people who have said, oh, well, I'm going to this sort of mindfulness session, or I'm going to a psychological safety session, and you're going, really? Wow, that's cool. And then they'll bring that back into their leadership approach, because there's a bit of their brain that has unlearnt some practices that might have been reinforced through in a performance-based culture, and been more opened to going, actually, yeah, like I can do this in a different way, and then practice. But for me, any change requires a team effort. So if a leader's alone in their their journey. It's not as fun as if a leader who's saying, hey guys, I'm trying to try this new thing, come with me and tell me how it goes, and actually use effective coaches and mentors as part of that process. So I coach a lot of leaders, and them having that sort of neutral space to just be able to go, oh, Elissa, what do you think about this? And is also a part of their ability to open up, like a flower in the garden.
I love the garden analogy.
Yeah, I know. Like we need to appreciate nature. You know, nature is we are nature. So we've got to be cognizant of that. And I use nature metaphors all the time in my work, and in the future, like given the climate crisis that we're reading about and seeing, if we're not cognizant of that, we're not demonstrating any form of leadership or awakeness in that scenario.
There's a couple of things I'd love to zoom into there.
Yeah.
Before we move on, which is that vulnerability piece from leaders. How important do you think that is when we talk kind of the application of emotional intelligence with the co-design, co-delivery, like, you know, some of these key skill sets? Do you think vulnerability is something that we need to harness more as a tool in terms of connection, inspiration, you know, openness?
Yeah, I think vulnerability is a loaded word for people, especially if the old ways of working were that leaders had to be strong and demonstrate strength all the time and not show weakness. Let's flick that term. Well, vulnerability can be incredibly strong. And I know people through my original work in domestic and family violence prevention who are incredibly strong, amazing people, and when they demonstrate vulnerability, it comes from a position of strength and support. So leaders need to show enough, I think, but again, that's where concepts of like what is private and public, where sometimes a complete vulnerability can happen within a coaching context or counseling context in some situations, but in front of colleagues, it's being human, and humans are vulnerable, and humans are at times off. Humans are at times unclear of what we need to do. So I think if you can demonstrate that genuineness in your approach, as well as the decisiveness where you need to, finding that balance, that's the key to the whole thing. I think being vulnerable is a really powerful tool to learn, but it's got to be in a safe space.
And appropriate to, yeah. Thank you. And the other piece that this makes me question is, do you think that we were talking there of the leader that might be more established and more set in their ways, kind of more strong in the way that they are managed, more traditional was your framing, which I think is perfect. Is there an opportunity then for the people that are newer in their field, the up and comers that are coming through their craft, to pick up on some of this now and hone into it? Are they more adaptable, malleable, you know, because they're more nimble because they're learning?
Yeah, I think yes. And I think in project contexts, like project, you know, transformational contexts, agile ways of working have brought in new language. It's brought in new tools and rituals. And so there's many people who are getting exposed to the concept. And this doesn't mean, when I say agile, it doesn't mean I'm following one particular methodology. There's like about 12 different agile formal project and change management methodologies that exist, but it's thinking more in terms of that flexibility. So the mindset of agile, which is it's embedded in every methodology. It's meant to be co-designed, meant to be collaborative, meant to be open, meant to be the lines between silos aren't meant to exist. It's meant to be outcome driven. And so as people are moving up the ranks and even learning some of those concepts in school and university and even in trades, it will start to shift that leadership. So we're growing our future leaders now. So people who are, I said all my research 20 years in the future. So if you're 20 now and you're just in the process of doing a trade or getting your first job or being at university, in 20 years time, you'll be 40. I'll be a bit older than that. But you'll be able to they'll be leaders. They'll be middle managers. They'll be owners of their own entrepreneurial businesses. So they have to sort of start thinking that future leadership is going to be very different in some ways than what it is today. But there'll still be corporate governance while we're still legislated in Australia in particular. There'll still be risk management. There'll still be laws that we need to sort of not breach, or unless we want to head off to a correctional setting. It's really the approach is how we can do future leadership in a way that still is within the boundaries that are, I guess, generally accepted. But we've seen disruption, just look at Uber coming in and the taxi industry getting disrupted. They were blindsided by that technology. And that was a simple app. In the future, as other surprises start to happen, if people are not looking at the broader environment, their businesses may be blindsided. I say it's looking for the weak signals, and leaders of the future need to have their ability to get their radar on all the time, or have access to people who are generating those insights in a meaningful way for them.
Thank you. It's powerful. You mentioned in our conversations not losing the ability to make meaning of it all, and to make sense of to apply our common sense. What do you mean by that? I think you used a very powerful metaphor with me, which was my watch, my technology kind of telling me. What do you mean when you talk about reminding us to make meaning as we go?
Yeah, I think probably the easiest way to describe it would be the concept of knowing that sometimes what you are fed in reality through media, through messaging, through conversations may not actually be the truth. So we saw that in America with recent elections, with don't want to even mention his name. It's like Voldemort in Harry Potter, isn't it? Like Trump's sort of impact and the fact that, the amount of news that's coming out now, that is it even an AI speaking to me, or is it a human? So what I mean by making meaning is that important connection between your mind and your logical brain, your gut, your intuitive, that gut feeling, that punch that you're going, oh, something's sort of not quite right. And also your heart, and that sort of axis between those three elements for me is something that I really strongly encourage people to just not blindly follow. So work out ways that you can listen to your own intuition. Or if you want more of an evidence type person, is look for multiple sources before you make a firm decision. And I know this might be telling people to say, oh yeah, Elissa, of course I do that. But unconsciously, we're all getting sort of, depending on how much time we spend on social media and other places, we're getting manipulated to the point where for some people, which is why I mentioned the watch when we chatted the other day, is that people say, oh, AI will never lead me. I'll never, the machine, I'm my own person. But then who wakes up to their phone alarm going off? Who has a buzzer happening on their Apple Watch that reminds them to drink water or to stand up, or to these sort of little things that we think, well, that's still within my control. I can take the watch off. Yes, but at some point it means that you've forgotten how to get to your grandma's house because you're so reliant on a map finder in your iPhone or in your car. It's like, let's make sure we maintain our ability to make meaning. Because if there was a terrible worst case outlier, a disaster where we lost power, which did happen in quite a few places recently over the hot summers in Australia, a lot of people were going, well, we can't communicate, we can't work. So making meaning for me means stay focused on those other signals that you have that just come from being human.
Yeah, I think that's a really important message, particularly when you think about our gut and our microbiomes developed over hundreds of thousands of years, and this new technology that's emerging, and the temptation to just go, well, that said that, so therefore I'm wrong. I think we've, whether we would admit it or not, we've all been guilty to that.
And the effective leaders are the ones that are curious and they question, and they don't, like they look at a report and they'll say, oh, like in projects and change, like, oh, it's green, like, but is it really green? Like, how can we check and validate? And experienced leaders will know that they're looking for other signs and other indicators, and if there's that inconsistency, that's when your gut's telling, oh, something feels wrong, or your head's going, oh, this doesn't look right from my experience. So it's maintaining that process and practicing that as much as you can. Pretend you're a psychic for a day.
I think that axis is amazing, because also, like, if you think of the axis as you frame it, of your heart, mind, gut, then there's a whole different way you could look at that. It's kind of your gut feels, but also sometimes just applying logic and thinking further, and, like you say, being curious, reading more, going further. One of the things that terrifies me is that even with the news I absorb, I used to read a newspaper. I studied journalism. I used to read a newspaper, and I'd just go everywhere and I'd just like absorb it all. And it wouldn't necessarily be in my area of interest, right? You just open the newspaper and there'd be sports, and so I'd read it.
Yeah.
Whereas the news that I consume, the algorithm has saved me time, and it knows what articles I like to read, and it's the world news. And so therefore it feeds me this small portal of the information I like, which means there's this whole other piece that I'm not kind of capturing, learning, because it's saving me time. But doesn't that mean that I'm becoming more narrow-minded and just learning about the thing that I'm interested in rather than rounding out? It's very interesting.
Yeah, I just think it's about extending that concept of diversity and inclusion, and getting as many broad and beautiful and different opinions as you can, and then sort of as a leader to be able to sort of sift through that information. And AI can be an advisor, can help with that. Like, you can ask ChatGPT to say, what are the 10 things you think I should do in this scenario? And it'll give you 10 things. But then you still need to, at the end of the day, make that decision. But in future organizations, there might be AI making decisions and then instructing the human, which makes people a bit twitchy, but it's a scenario that could actually happen, or a machine telling another machine what to do. We've just got to make sure, especially from the ethical lens, that we don't lose our meaning making, so that we don't think something, we've got to pick up when something smells a bit fishy.
And do you think that that's particularly important when we are kind of thinking about the focus, if we're focusing in on leadership, that we prioritize that emotional read in certain contexts, like D&I, or being human enough to go. I had an example recently which I could draw upon, where an introvert performed slightly more poorly than an extrovert in an interview, and the hiring manager said to me, gosh, it's really difficult because I can see on paper that person, and I'm like, no, but they just weren't quite out there enough, and therefore I don't think that the business were completely sold. And it was, I could see in her mind that she was going, but I know that that's the person, that's my person. But in presentation, that person's done a lot better in the interview. Is it, things like that where we really need to, apply logic, apply that axis, and how do we make sure we're doing that?
Yeah, I think so. Which goes a bit beyond, in those recruiting contexts where you've got to, tick some boxes and, out of 5 or out of 10 or whatever. But then you're sitting there going, oh, there's something about this person that I reckon would really resonate with the team. It's a gray, that gray zone. And that perception, especially of experienced recruiters or leaders like such as myself who've recruited and help organizations recruit people, where I just go, don't discount that, and maybe shortlist them, check that hunch with your references for the person. And then suddenly you go, oh, it's not so much about, like if I'm thinking of organizations where they're wanting to bring in a fully sort of inclusive and diverse workforce, including people with disability who think differently because of the way that their life has been. And so sometimes people go, oh, the person's got a disability. I'm mentoring someone at the moment, but he's got an incredible way of looking at the world. And so as long as people can look past, what the guy sitting in front of them, like they'll be missing something incredibly awesome if they don't actually hire him. So this is where, again, sometimes if people aren't as good at communicating or different in how they communicate just because they're wired differently, we're missing an opportunity. And from a leadership perspective, it's broadening our lens of diversity and inclusion, and having another category that is like for the hunch.
Yeah, no, I
if you
agree.
have to have a category,
yeah, if you have to have a category, exactly. Yeah, I think that's really profound. As we envisage this, then it would be remiss of me not to ask, we're applying the lens of change leadership. And why do you think that as we look into the future that is going to be more pertinent than, say, project leadership?
Yeah, I spoke to a group of people in Meanjin the other day, Brisbane. I'm trying to learn more about our culture, our Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander cultures here in Queensland. And for me, I said to the group in Queensland, which was a Change Management Institute Christmas party, so we'd all had a glass of wine in our hand at the time, that I think in the future of projects, change managers and leaders will be in charge. And we all cheered, of course, toasted that vision. But often it's the reverse, where people say, oh, well, the hierarchy in a project structure is that we have a sponsor, from the business, or an accountable executive, and then we have a project manager, and then we have a change manager as one of the trustee team members. But I think for us, people are so critically important to seeing outcomes come to fruition, and the design of those target operating models of the future need to be done in a cooperative and collaborative way, that I feel that it should be a change-led approach as opposed to a sort of delivery-led process. The project manager still will have a role, so love my PMI buddies. But I also think that if we flip the narrative just a little bit and make it more benefits-led, more outcome-focused, you can't not have people calling the shots. So the sponsor or executive has to very much have a customer or end user flavor as part of them, and not let delivery of the technical product, if that's what we're building, dominate the governance proceedings. Change managers should be essentially dominating the governance proceedings about, can we do this? How ready are they really? Will the outcomes we expect be the ones we expect? Are we investing enough in the change management effort? And then lift it to portfolio and say, what else is going on in the organization or the context that might mean that these beautiful people working for us just don't have any more capacity to engage and learn because they're exhausted. So it's putting that change lens, for me, is a dominant little flag waving moment for me, because I think if we don't do that, we may make decisions, especially around AI investment, that are purely driven by economic efficiency, as opposed to is this actually something we want to change? Do we want AI to actually do this for us? What do we not want AI to do should be the number one question. What do we want to remain in the hands of the human?
We want to remain in the hands of the human. I like that angle. We get so excited about handing things over to AI, but what do we want to keep for ourselves?
Yeah. I wrote in one of my doctoral papers, I wrote about determining the human to AI ratio in operating models of the future, and that there may be parts of organizations in the future that we fully machine-led, machine-run, but then maybe the other end of the continuum, we say, well, we don't want to have Mrs. Jones in the nursing home to be given her pills by a robot. We want Sally to do that, a human. So, and again, different companies would have different value propositions around that, because maybe they'll say, well, we don't care about our old friend, and the robot will still deliver an outcome of getting the pills there, but is it done with heart? And maybe that's what will be the difference in value proposition between organizations that maintain that sort of heart and human in at least some of their work processes, not just the leadership decision ones.
Yeah,
Gets you thinking, doesn't it?
It does, and it feels like if we think purely from efficiencies, then we have a risk of losing the kind of magic, the magical moments within which we create a glue for that, like that customer service moment, that moment where someone comes back, returns.
When back to that concept of vulnerability, like if you go visit Mrs. Jones, and you'll say, oh, she doesn't look quite well today, that sort of hunch that, my gut feel or my eyes, my heart is saying something, as opposed to, R2D2 maybe not having a sensor that picks that up yet.
She took her pills. Gosh, we've run out of time, but it has been amazing to have you on the show. Before you go, for the questions I always ask guests that come onto my show, Dr. Farrow, what is one interview question that particularly resonates with you, that you've either asked someone when you've been interviewing, or that you have been asked that's meant, that you want to hire?
One that I've been asking recently, again, because I'm a bit wacky, futurist, strategic foresight specialist, is asking them the question that in 20 years' time, if we've got a lunar base, what would your dream job be?
Oh gosh, that's such a unique one for the show. It's amazing.
But it gets you thinking, right? Like, depending on this, all the space race and whether we like it or not, like, there'll be so many awesome opportunities work-wise. The change managers will be up there helping integrate people into lunar life. And again, I say it flippantly, but it's a futurist. We need to sometimes be really creative and improvise, because if we go to the outlier wildcard future, it means that we can go, oh yeah, actually that could happen.
And how would you respond to your own question?
Me, well, I'll be retired by then, maybe. No, I think for me, I would love to just make sure that the culture of lunar life was inclusive and generous and kind. That's what I would be working. So I'm not sure what role that would be, apart from sort of a coach in the future, lunar coach, lunar culture coach. There you go. I'll put that on a t-shirt.
And as we wrap up this amazing future conversation that's full of nuggets of inspiration for everyone, what golden piece of advice or words of wisdom would you like to leave reverberating in everyone's ears?
I think it's just what we've spoken a little about. Don't ever lose your ability to make meaning, your own personal meaning of something. Don't ignore your gut, don't ignore your heart, don't ignore your head, because that is information that we need in this ever-changing world. So yeah, that would probably be the golden nugget from me.
Thank you so much. You've been a breath of fresh air.
Thank you.
You've taken us everywhere, and to Luna.
I'm going to get there sometime.
Perhaps we'll record the next episode from Luna.
Yeah, do it.
I'll stop recording.